Hello everyone, you are watching The World 1,000 Years Ago, How Globalization Has Changed Human Society, featuring historian, sinologist, and Professor Valerie Hansen from Yale University. This program is part of China and the World webinar series, presented by the Center for China and Globalization, CCG. This session is moderated by CCG President Dr. Wang Huiyao. Dr. Wang, over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good evening and good morning. I'm sure Professor Hansen is good morning for you. And welcome to CCG China and the World Dialogue, live from CCG head office here in Beijing. And thank you for joining us today. This is actually live, and we have many audience online. And this is a series episode that we are organized for the last several months. So we're very pleased to have Professor Valerie Hansen with us today. So this virtual program is a part of the CCG China and the World webinar series, seeking to engage global thought leaders and well-known scholars on topics connecting current situation and, of course, the situation of globalization, and also with China roles in it. I want to first introduce Professor Hansen. Professor Hansen is a world-renowned historian and a sinologist, and has been a professor at the Yale since 1998. She has been a great friend of China, having lived in China for 6+ years. Actually, Professor Hansen is interested in Chinese history and civilization, and has taught and also visited institutions in China, including Peking University and also Xiamen University. I also saw a report of the lecture you gave at the Peking University about 2 years ago. And she was also a visiting scholar of the University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom, and also College of France in Paris. One of the things I think Professor Hansen has made a major contribution to the study of world history, traditional China and world history. Her books on those subjects have gained international recognition, including the famous The Silk Road, A New History, for which she was awarded with the Gustavus Renis International Book Prize and International Convention of Asian Scholars Book Prize in 2013. So quite a great book. And most recently, the year 1000, one explorer connected the world and globalization began, which actually will be the topic of our discussion today. I have a copy of your book that in Chinese, but hopefully going to publish very soon. So this is a sample book I have. But as Professor Hansen knows, that the study of globalization is really gets a very get a lot of attention, and of course we are very pleased to invite you to be a guest for our think tank, Center for China and Globalization, which you are very well-known scholars on the globalization subject. And particularly, you have extended the length of the globalization, the origin of that, 500 years before Columbus, which is, I think, a great discovery on itself as well. And also that we felt that globalization is really has changed the world beyond recognition, and actually we are now at a crossroad. We have a deglobalization, we have a globalization, we have a many new trend, and also how we're going to meet the challenge of a future globalization. So by looking at the history, by looking at some of the fundamentals that you've been discovering in your book, is really fascinating to talk about. So perhaps I know you are also very proficient in Mandarin. Perhaps you could introduce a bit to us in Mandarin, and then to say hi to the larger audience in China, but also other parts of the world. So Professor Hansen, 你可以给我们讲几句吗？
好的，非常感谢你们邀请我今天 Many thanks to this invitation. Yeah, this is my morning and this is evening to Chinese audience to talk about my book. Previously, we believe that we have sent emails, exchanges talking on the topics to discuss in this dialogue. Well, actually, we are all the products of globalization. You been visiting as a scholar and a student in Canada and the UK. I've been studying in Taiwan province, Japan, and China mainland. So when we were young, we received a very great opportunity going abroad to study and work. When you mentioned my book, which was featured by the greatest conclusion, is about the beginning of globalization has been way more advanced versus the well-recognized conclusion, which is determined by the great discovery of Colombia. And I agree to some extent with this conclusion, but if we took 1500 as a start, actually the history of globalization started around Europe. But my book would also spare the attention to China and Polynesia and many other continents. And they actually have started the globalization way earlier than 1500. So really appreciate this opportunity talking with you in this dialogue.
Professor Hansen. Yeah. So actually, it's really fascinating. We've been talking to many international opinion leaders, well-known scholars, politicians, about this subject of globalization. And you actually not only studied the history of globalization, and you made a contribution to study that with all the evidence that you've been discovering and connecting them with very logic behind that. But also, you are very familiar with China. For example, you talk about this Quanzhou, which you see, about in the Song Dynasty. There's so many international, migrant and also different merchant and all kinds of people come to Quanzhou, and I actually visited the museum in Quanzhou. You can see all the evidence, people from Arab, from Middle East, from India, from other parts of the world. So it's really fascinating to look at that history. So the globalization actually we've been benefiting enormously. As you rightly said, we are product of the globalization. Our experience has luckily brought us to different parts of the world. So we have this global view to look at the world now. But what's the reason that that you really go into this study of this globalization? Maybe you can give us some your background and also how you come to this conclusion that like Vikings, like the people in Quanzhou, or how they really move around the world, around year 1,000, 1,000 years ago, which is a fascinating history.
Well, I come to globalization from the Silk Road, as you said, and in my Silk Road book focused, of course, on China, what's now China and now Central Asia, and the often histories of the Silk Road end around the year 1000. That's when the cave in Dunhuang closes. And, there's a theory from a professor at Beida named Rong Xinjiang, who has proposed that the people living in Dunhuang heard about the fall of Khotan, Hetian, to the armies of the Kara Khanate, so the Heihan, and because their response to that invasion was to close the document cave. Not everybody agrees with that theory, but it's a known fact that the Kara Khanates do take Khotan in the year 1000. And another event, a key event in the year 1000, is the Treaty of Chanyuan between the Liao and the Sung. And so when I was finishing the Silk Road book, I knew about those two events, And I knew that the Vikings had touched down in Canada really probably around exactly the year 1000. And I wondered if there was any connection among those three events. And after spending 5 years looking around, I concluded that a lot of the world is undergoing the same process in the year 1000, that regions are getting bigger, people are encountering people from other places and from other regions, and that it's having a profound effect on people. And there are earlier examples of contacts among people in different countries, extensive contacts. The Silk Road is one example. The Roman Empire has trade contacts with India. But in the year 1000, much of the world is affected by these new contacts. And so that's how I ended up with this topic and this idea.
Yeah, that's really great. And actually, in your previous book, it's also a masterpiece. I think the Silk Road, a new history with documents. Basically, you describe the remarkable finds that revolutionized, I think, also our understanding of the trade routes of the Silk Road. So it's really in this book that you explored 8 sites on that along the roads from Xi'an to Samarkand and to the Middle East, where merchants, envoys, pilgrims, and travelers mixed with cosmopolitan community with different religions, and explain how this very modest commercial artillery become the world's most famous cultural superhighway. So probably we could say, even though the globalization begins 1,000 years ago, or a year 1000, but also probably the spirit or the idea, maybe some original, culture of the globalization already began when the Silk Road started already. I mean, that's where people starting to move around, at least culturally, spiritually, and contact-wise. Would you say that the Silk Road maybe also has a huge impact on the globalization as well?
I think the Silk Road, what's going on in China and Central Asia in the Silk Road, there are parallels in other parts of the world. Like Europe, we know less about Africa and America because we don't have written sources from those places, or very minimal written sources. But the impact, I would say, in the period before the year 1000, not that many people are affected. They may meet someone from another place. And people in China, I mean, all historical processes, especially when you study China, there's no beginning, right? You say, this is when things begin, and someone says, no, it began earlier than you think. I have evidence showing that there's even earlier evidence of this phenomenon that you're talking about. And I think with the Silk Road, there's a shipwreck called Belitung. It's an African or an Indonesian boat that was found in the Java Sea off the coast of Indonesia in a place called Belitung. And it was carrying Chinese ceramics. And the date of the ship is 826, 827. And we know that because there's a Chinese a pot with the date written in Chinese on it. And it was carrying 60,000 ceramics. 60,000, that's 826. That's already mass production. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about in my book. That's a very early example. 100 years later, there's another shipwreck, and it's carrying 600,000 Chinese pots in a single ship. So, yes, there's some evidence of it earlier, but I bring up those 2 examples because those are examples of how shipping and ocean travel is on a completely different scale than overland trade. And the Silk Road is mostly about the period before 1000, mostly about overland trade. And there's a constraint on overland trade that animals can carry only so much. We're in a period, right? There are no machines, right? There's no mechanization. So you have a group of, I think everyone's mental image of the Silk Road is of camels. In fact, the most of the trade, and we know this from Chinese documents, is on horseback, or on donkeys or in carts, and it's only on camels when you're going through the desert, through sand. And if people have a choice, they avoid the sand and they go on roads. So I think there's a real change in the year 1000 because we see this shift to sea travel that people have been on the sea a little bit before 1000, but in the year 1000, we can see in these different places of the Vikings, the Polynesians, the Chinese, we can see this, the beginnings of really long distance sea travel.
Mm-hmm. That's really, yeah, I think that's a very interesting comparison because I think that, Silk Road maybe had some element of that, but actually when massive globalization, I mean, at least with the ocean travel start, when a merchant and people starting to moving around, that's really brought globalization, I think, into its real, on the stage and accelerate that. So that's really interesting to know. I mean, I'm glad that you have done this study and then, really, evidently, expanded the globalization scope 1 year 1000. So now we had this globalization going on, and we had a lot of globalization. Basically, for the last century, we see how this globalization really changed the world with all this modern technology and everything. So in terms of the globalization, how do you think of the globalization main characteristic? Maybe before it was trade. I mean, that was really one of the key characteristics, or the religion, or the culture, exchanges and things like that, and all this overseas student and or Xuanzang, went to India, or even during the Tang Dynasty, we had the Japanese student come to China. So how do you see the phases of globalization? I mean, even though if it's 1,000 years or even longer than that, you have any? Yeah.
It's funny. I was going to ask you the same question.
Okay.
About the phases of globalization. I think that, and I was thinking about starting now and going back in time, so that the consensus for that among historians is that the current phase of globalization that we're in starts in the 1970s and the 1980s. I don't know if you would agree with that. And the key thing that observers look at is space-time compression. And so that you can get on an airplane and be somewhere, you can travel from New York to Beijing in a day, right? So the space and the time have been compressed. You're taking a journey that, if you had traveled by boat, could take, months, is suddenly reduced to 1 day. And so that's something that I think is the hallmark of the phase of globalization we're living in now. And I think so that's something that's new, this airplanes, this kind of airplanes and computers, and the fact that you and I are having this conversation in real time, seeing each other, right? These are new things that did not happen in the past. But so that's the first phase I would see. Is that the phase that you see? That would you start in the 70s?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that you're right. As we discussed, I think we have seen some the sparks and maybe some preliminary phenomena during the probably Silk Road. But I think when you talk about when globalization started 1,000 years, that's where really people starting to move around, and then globalization started to pick up the momentum. But of course, then we have the Columbus discovered the Americans. But even we have a Zheng He, the Chinese marshal who has led 7 times expedition to the Southeast Asia, or even to as far as African. So that's where all the things started to move around, and they carry all the products, seeds, or even maybe diseases starting to move around. But I would say that that globalization has been really accelerated, since the Industrial Revolution, where I think, as you said, the technology even more so brought the globalization to a much fast pace and speed, and where we got today now, we're simultaneously connected and with the modern technology. So that has brought a lot of changes we are facing, and also what all the deglobalization probably as well. So that's a bit to the contemporary time, but even look at the history, I think it's fascinating to trace those origin at where those things made beneficial to the mankind that we still also study today. I hope.
Oh, I hope so too.
Yeah. So maybe we'll go back to the history then. So over 1,000 years ago, maybe when the Quanzhou, where they welcome all the foreign merchant and travelers. So at that time, Confucianism already prevailed in China. And so what do you think of the Confucianism, the impact on the Song Dynasty, and also from a historical perspective, how the globalization actually has a huge impact in China, as you said in your book. At that time, probably China already has a 100 million population, and the whole world probably is only have 250 or even. So China is already quite a big portion of the global population, over 30-40%. So
right,
so that,
absolutely.
Yeah, so that was really fun. People don't probably realize that history, and so maybe you can give a bit of description of your study of the Song Dynasty, and what's the historical impact or place that it has at that time. And regarding the globalization, that a lot of things you mentioned in your book as well.
One of the things that I say in the book about the Song Dynasty is that Song Dynasty China is the most globalized place on earth at the time. And the reason I say that is that so many people living in China, especially on the coast, that's still true today, right? That people on the coast of China are much more affected by these international trends than people in the interior. But people, and Quanzhou is a very good example of a city, a coastal city that is affected by globalization. As you said, you can see in the Quanzhou Museum the evidence of the foreign residents. There's the many tombstones of people in Arabic, but there are also a lot of Indians in Quanzhou, and you can see that in some of the stones that from preserved pieces of Hindu temples that no longer survive. The big impact for the reason China is so important is that it's already a manufacturing center. And when we say manufacturing center, nowadays, I think people immediately think of a factory powered by electricity. Well, in the Song, there's no electricity. I mean, there's electricity in the sky, right? Mankind has not figured out how to harness electricity, but there are huge workshops and kilns making ceramics. And I mentioned the ceramics from the shipwrecks because they're the thing that survive archaeologically. But we know that the Song Dynasty is also exporting metals, both metal objects like pots and knives and weapons, but also bars of iron and lead and tin. And we also know that China has these massive exports that they're carrying on Chinese ships. The Chinese have the compass. They've discovered the compass. So the ships can navigate even if it's cloudy or at night. Well, they're not sailing at night, but even if it's cloudy, they can use the compass to navigate. So China has these massive exports. I think what people less often think about is the Chinese importing, how many things that they were bringing in. And as I talk about in the book and I talk about in Quanzhou, lots of people are craving, in Chinese, the word is xiang. And xiang is a very broad term in Chinese because it means fragrant woods like sandalwood. There's aloes wood. All these woods that in the modern world, we don't think about very much unless you happen to have a box made out of sandalwood, a fragrant box that you keep some jewelry in. But the people in the Sung were bringing in these fragrant woods. They were bringing in foods, tastes, spices, and bringing in all of these natural products from Southeast Asia and also the Arabian Peninsula. And so there's this huge demand within China for these foreign goods. And that's what's fueling the trade. Now, you asked me about the Confucians. The Confucians don't say that much about this trade. This is a case where the government is, and there's a historian, an American historian named Charles Hartman, who has just brought out a new book about Sung history. And one of his arguments is that there are two groups within the Chinese government. There's a famous group we know about because they became Confucian thinkers. There's a less famous group of technocrats. A lot of the technocrats are linked to Wang Anshi, that kind of person who, I mean, Wang Anshi also had things to say and was a philosopher, but the technocrat, someone who is looking at governance and just figuring out what is the best way to tax the trade. And that's, I think, one of the things that's very interesting in the Sung is that there are innovations in how to tax the trade. And everyone knows about the tribute system, right? We've all studied that, and it exists in the Tang. It exists in the Sung, but it kind of falls by the side that the government is spending much more of its energy on taxing ships that arrive in Chinese ports and collecting 3 kinds of taxes. So when a ship arrives, government officials go to the ship, and there's only certain ports that have the bureaucracy to do this kind of taxation. And I talk about in Quanzhou how they handle this before they are recognized as a city that can do this kind of taxation. And there are parallels in later Chinese history, right, of certain ports are designated. I mean, even now you would say, like, where are there free trade zones? But historically, this is not a free trade zone. There are certain ports, the ship pulls into port, the government officials get on the boat, and then they take just a fixed percent, and it changes during the Song Dynasty, fixed percent of the ship's cargo. Then they look at what's left, and then they say, oh, these are the goods we have a government monopoly on. Those are very sophisticated ideas about which goods should be sold by a monopoly, and they confiscate a share of those. And then there's another category of goods that's called coarse goods, and the officials say, oh, these we care less about. So we're going to collect a tax on, we're going to take some of these, but you, the ship owner, can sell these in the port. And when you look at Song Dynasty documents, you can see that officials are trying to decide how much taxation can they do. If they tax too much, merchants won't come again. If they tax too little, then the government doesn't have the revenues it needs. So that's very sophisticated. And I don't know of anything like that happening in other parts of the world in the year 1000.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's fascinating to hear you talk about the vivid, the live, dynasty of the Song. I mean, that was really what you say it's the most globalized place in the world at that time. It's really, really very fascinating to review that. Actually, my father come from Hangzhou. I mean, I see how that region now in China, even today, has revived very, very strong. A lot of a great tradition they have then. But also, of course, Quanzhou, as you mentioned, already become one of the biggest port then in China, probably in the world too. So how does any lessons we can learn from the Song Dynasty? If they get so globalized, if they get so as you said, tax system is so advanced, and then keep a balance, not going to drive the merchant out, but also keep them motivated to do more business with foreign trade and things like that. But also, Song have signed this Taiyuan Treaty, with Liao, and they have managed to secure a very long period of time of security and peace. I had a dialogue with Graham Allison. I mean, he's also fascinated about this special treaty, and he may think that is one of exception. that we can get out of the Hushitis trap. So, so what do you think about China? Of course, compare that and maybe now. What lesson can we learn from the Song Dynasty? Maybe to we can continue the globalization, because China now is really facing a lot of, of course, competition, but also there's a thinking, China, as we talk about the ports, China now has the 7th largest port out of the 10 in the world now. And also China trade is also doing good. But China is probably trying to restore its rightful place, maybe restore the Song Dynasty glory that it used to have, also population-wise, trade-wise, and globalization density. But China now today facing a lot of challenges. What do you think of those, and the lesson we can learn, or historically we can draw from, and maybe how we can continue the globalization, maybe compare the globalization now and then. What are the similarity and what are the new challenges? I mean, those are interesting questions.
They are interesting questions. I think one of the big differences between globalization then and my book is called The Beginning of Globalization, right? I'm not claiming in the year 1000 that globalization is fully developed. In terms of how many people in the world know about the whole globe, there's just probably a handful of geographers writing in Arabic who have a mental vision of the whole globe and know which parts of the globe have people on them. They don't know about the Americas, but they know how big the globe is, and they know how many of those places people are living in. I think the big difference between globalization in the year 1000 and up to 1500 and today is that in the period I'm writing about, there are natural limits on globalization. So I told you about the shipwreck that has the 930,000, excuse me, it's from the year 930. It has 600,000 ceramics on it. Those ships, the reason we know about that is it sank. That ship sank in the Java Sea. Nowadays, so historically, it was possible for a country, an exporting country, to export a certain amount of goods, but never enough to overwhelm the local production. So archaeologists have found Chinese ceramics all along the coast, Southeast Asia, India, the Middle East, East Africa. You talked about Zheng He's route. Absolutely, the Chinese are active, much earlier than Zheng He on this route, all the way from, I looked for a name for this, the Guangzhou, Quanzhou to Mombasa route to East Africa, that route. But so the Chinese are goods, we can find Chinese goods. We know the Chinese goods were being sold all along that route. But we also know that local manufacturers were continuing to produce. And we know that archaeologically because we can see copies of Chinese vessels. So there's a picture in my book of a Chinese vessel that was found in a city in Iran called Shush, or historically Susa. And then we have a local copy that's actually very inferior. The Chinese vessel is quite beautiful and has a clean white glaze. The local vessel has a kind of a bad glaze with cracks in it. But so we know that local manufacturing continues. And that, I think, is one of the big changes from today, where because of 747s, because of large cargo airplanes, one country can produce so much that it can take over the whole market of another country. And I think that's one of the things that we have to think about going forward with globalization. And I think that the pandemic has showed us this, that being entirely dependent on another country for any product is probably not a good long-term strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, no, great, absolutely. I think probably another lesson we can learn is that, during the Song Dynasty, it's so flourished and so, because they also secured a relatively long period of the peace with the China Yuan Treaty, of course, and so for any globalization to really have a great development, have a prosperity, have a peace is important probably. And so we need to really secure that peace, and rather than we're getting into a lot of conflict. And also another lesson probably we can learn is that the trade, the merchant, really can probably secure it can bond people and link people together. The business interests maybe can really be a common denominator to really to get people together. And of course, we have some ideas, of religion and things like that to really make people understand each other better, or at least know the culture. So there's still many things we could learn from history. I mean, also, reading your book, we find there's so many interesting lessons that we can really draw the lessons from. But just coming back to the history, since you are a historian, a well-known historian at Yale, and so what do you think about this Confucianism? Maybe I mean, this may be a little bit a broader subject. I still want to come back, because it's certainly if it's not globalization, but the Confucianism has actually greatly influenced the region probably. We're not even talking about cultural globalization, but then you can see the Tang Dynasty. The Japanese had a lot of students in Chang'an, and then we see the neighboring countries, Vietnam and all those other countries. So what do you think about the regionalization in Asia, that Confucianism can play some role? Of course, we had a Buddhism influenced China as well, where Xuanzang went to India to get that back. But what about Confucianism? Because it's still today, I think that the Confucianism still has a big influence, at least in China and the Greater China, and probably Asia as well. So what's your assessment on that? Because you are a historian on East Asian culture as well.
Well, I think one of the things that's very interesting about the year 1000 is you can see certain regions taking place. And actually, you can see that earlier in the case when you talk about East Asia, right? That we have, I would say, a very good example of soft power, of China's soft power, that we have Chinese characters moving. Well, or I was going to say, the characters don't move by themselves, right? People in Korea and Japan, what's now modern Korea, modern Japan, modern Vietnam, all adopt the Chinese writing system. And there's a book market. That's, I think, one of the things that's very interesting in the year 1000 is that books are destroyed. There are, when, Kaifeng falls to the Jurchen, a lot of the imperial library is damaged, a lot of books are lost, and then they can be recovered because there are copies available on the Korean peninsula, in the Japanese, in Japan. So there are very clear links among the different East Asian countries using Chinese characters. And of course, it means that texts can move and don't have to be translated. And in a period when translation is so expensive and slow, I mean, Kumarajiva is a good example, right? That to be able to leave texts in their original languages is very valuable. But one of the things I think that's interesting about regions is that they can change. So, we can look and say, oh, it's perfect. There's this region of East Asia, and China and Japan and Korea all have these similarities, and Vietnam, they have these similarities. But if you go back to the year 1000, one of the things that's interesting about the Song is that it's a very economically prosperous dynasty, but it's also geographically a small dynasty, right? The Song, at first, I mean, they cede the 16 prefectures to the Liao, but when the Jurchen, the Jin dynasty, invade, all of North China comes under foreign rule. And so you could draw the regions in East Asia a little bit differently, and I try to do that in the book, that there's a region where the territory under the Liao and the Jin has much more contact with Japan and Korea than it does with the Song territory. And that's where we see that whole region, there's this idea that the world is going to come to an end in 1052. And that idea does not circulate in Song China, but it does circulate among the Liao and in Japan and in Korea. So I think one of the things that we can see is that a country may belong to more than one region. You know, when we draw regions, we tend to think, oh, well, there's, you know, these countries belong in this region and these countries belong in that region. But when we look at how people in the past lived, you know, at one moment they may see themselves as part of one region, and then in another movement they may see themselves as part of another region. So to me, that's one of the things that's very interesting.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting to hear that year 1000. That's where all the probably the East Asian probably is taking some kind of a shape. And as you rightly said, you know, Chinese language has been used in Japan and Korea or even Vietnam. And I read your book. You will even have a data center of all the in Korea. Have all the, you know, all the books was as kind of a modern an Asian data center where collect all the books in probably Chinese characters. So it's interesting to see that. And so that does have a regional impact. Maybe regionalism has been forming, and culture and also Confucianism probably played quite a big role there. And so I think that's probably, you can see the influence still on, you know, that the East Asian culture respect seniors, seniority. They pay a lot of attention to education. They do a lot of working pretty hard, and then and also, of course, they are also, you know, particularly for China, it's very peaceful. I mean, very neutral. They even when Zheng He, you know, 7 times expedition, they never conquered or colonized any place. So that's interesting to see the culture that is evolving, and hopefully.
If you will allow me, I will disagree with you about Zheng He, that most of the time it's peaceful, but there are times where the Chinese intervene in the succession disputes in countries where, so I think nowadays in China, Zheng He is often described as a very peaceful explorer. But when you look at sources from the time, it was usually peaceful trade. It was a huge shock to many places to have so many people arrive on the ships, right? Zheng He's fleet at its fullest has 28,000 people are arriving in a place that may not have enough food for that many people. And we have historic evidence that there are, a king will die, a king who was loyal, you know, had sent a tribute mission to China. He dies, a son takes over, and the Chinese don't approve of that son, and then they intervene. So, you know, I would say mostly peaceful for Zheng He.
No, but at least they haven't really conquered any place and stay there forever, or even, you know, that's even 100 years before Columbus. So I think, yeah, right. I mean, you know, at least largely peaceful. It's
right.
But what I'm thinking is that, of course, this culture, you know, that where China is having is basically quite peaceful historically. And so we hope that we are talking about globalization. We're talking about 1,000 years of globalization, how we can really continue the globalization. And so probably we can talk a bit about, you know, contemporary globalization. So what do you think about the globalization now? And as you are already a historian on the globalization, and already we had 1,000 years of globalization. And so what's your prediction or future look of the globalization, and what are the challenges and opportunities, and or even some other events we should really be look for, technology or people, migration, or you know, any other trade or whatever, you know, digital economy. You know, I know you are not an economist, but even from historical point of view, maybe we can look at the past, but we can also look at the future to some extent.
Well, I think one thing we can learn from the past, I'm convinced that globalization began in the year 1000 and on a worldwide basis, and that it's here to stay. I think it's part of the human condition. And I think the motivation for globalization is that people want new things. Sometimes it's new ideas, but often it's very specific commodities. And there's, in my book, I write about when the Vikings arrived in what's now Canada, that there are other encounters like this, but the one with the Vikings is better documented. We have a good description of it. They arrive, they meet the local people, the First Nations, the indigenous peoples of Canada, and the two groups look at each other. And this happens in lots of different places. They look at each other and think, well, what do those people have that we don't have? Oh, you have that nice, they look at the Vikings, they say, oh, you have this red cloth. We don't have that red cloth. That's something we really want. And the Vikings look at them and they say, oh, you have these furs. You have these fabulous furs from animals we've never seen. We want those. And they begin to trade. And that, I think, that human impulse is something that underlies globalization 1,000 years ago and today too. The same thing that people go into a store and they see something they've never seen before and think, oh, I have to have that. And that's true in Quanzhou in the year 1000. Oh, there's, this fragrant wood from Southeast Asia is so wonderful. I'm going to build a whole room out of this wood. It's that important to me. So that's something we can see, that motivation for globalization starts very early, and it's on an individual basis. People's desire for these new things. But we can also see very early on that some people were affected adversely by this trade. And one of the things that I was very interested in when I was researching the book was anti-globalization riots, where we have in Cairo in 996, in Constantinople in the early 1180s, these reactions against foreign merchants, where you have local people saying, oh, these people are just so much richer than our local merchants. They live in nicer houses. They've taken our women as their wives. And so, I think from the very beginning with globalization, we can see people benefiting from globalization, but we can also see people who are actively harmed by it and who object to it and want to control it. And so for me, thinking about the future of globalization, I think the question is, how can we control these forces? And I read your interview with Tom Friedman. He was on this show, right? And talking about that individual governments may not be, I was going to say, so globalization by itself, if you just let it go, it just keeps growing, right? And so then now in the modern world, we look at it and we think, oh, maybe we should take advantage of globalization, but make sure that people who've lost their jobs because of globalization have some kinds of protection. And I think the issue for us going forward is figuring out ways for governments to cooperate with each other so that they can lessen the negative impact of globalization. And you and Tom Friedman talked about the United Nations is really not that strong a body for this, right? I think I don't know, I'm a historian, I'm not good at looking at the future. You're better at that than I am. But do you see any avenues forward, going forward for greater cooperation among different governments or in different places?
Yeah, I think you raised a very interesting question. Also, you have give a very good, I think, analysis as well, because I think early globalization, probably people trading for different goods, different benefit, and really supplementary each other. That's where the original motivation of the trade and exchange of all those good quality products. That's really drive for a long time, of course. But as you said, once the globalization is fully on the speed, that has generated a lot of wealth, but also a lot of a gap, widening gap as well. particularly with today, we see the gap between rich and the poor is getting wider and wider now. Even during the pandemic, is getting wider and wider. And then yet, I was talking to Martin Wolf of Financial Times. He said, the globalization is global, but then democracy is local. So the local, government public cannot control the global magnitudes of the mass movement of the trade and the talent and the capital and all those things. So Tom Friedman is right. Probably we need a global governance, but also we're not yet reached global government yet. So I think we just, we have to come back to the multilateralism, strengthen the multilateralism, rather than we go unilateralism and fighting with each other. So it's really one review this fascinating history of globalization. I think when globalization was at the infant, at the start, it's manageable. It's still not a huge impact, but when globalization already gone into such a full swing and affect everyone's life, then probably how to have an inclusive globalization and equal globalization, it's probably all the governments should really think about. Particularly, I think we need to strengthen the UN system and multilateral system. We may also have to invent some new governance for the multilateral system to do that. For example, how we can have the tax, fair tax for not only for the home country, but the host country, but also, how can we move people around, knocking down those barriers and nationalism, because the internet is beyond borders. But then if we have too much nationalism, populism, that is going to set back globalization. So it's really a catch-22. We have to really solve that. So I think the discussion we have today is really meaningful, is that we look at the success of globalization, the origin of globalization, and how it went so far, but also we try to solve the challenges and meet all those new tasks of globalization. So it's really fascinating to talk about. So your book, The Silk Road: The New History, with document, which is a famous book now. And so the Silk Road, I mean, at that time, as you said, it was because of the economic conditions, because of no modern transportation, basically no infrastructure. So that cannot be, such a long distance of land masses cannot really expedite, speed up the globalization. But now we have infrastructure. China is also developing that quickly in the last 4 decades. So China has actually, started this global initiative of a Silk Road, Belt and Road. And so the globalization, I mean, for the last 75 years, we have the trade boom, we had the economic boom. But for the next 75 years after Second World War, can we really have an infrastructure revolution? So have a modern infrastructure Silk Road, and how can we really make Belt and Road work? And let's revive some of the Silk Road spirit and to do that. Maybe, I don't know if you have any thought or comments on that, because the Silk Road is, I mean, Chinese Belt and Road has a lot of inspiration taken from the historical Silk Road. And of course, there's many other routes that, Eurasia or, Spice Road and whatever, let's combine them, make a more multilateralized global trend for the future.
Oh yeah, I share the positive spirit. I do think, as a Silk Road historian, that it's important to remember when we talk about the period of the Silk Road that the Chinese also have a military presence in Central Asia, so that the reason silk is moving, there's so much silk in Central Asia, is because the currency of the Tang Dynasty, there's a chronic shortage of coins. So the Tang have 3 kinds of currencies: grain, so grain in fixed measures, coins, which they don't have enough of. The whole money supply of the Tang is about 10% coins, and then silk. And the silk is actually, when we think about it now, it doesn't seem like a very good currency, but it was actually pretty good. It held its value, and it was in some cases lighter than the coins. In terms, because with the Silk Road, the constraint is overland travel and carrying things overland. And I think you're right about modern infrastructure is different. High-speed trains and high-quality highways these did nothing like that existed in the past. But I think when we think about the Silk Road, that there are periods when the Chinese have a strong military presence in Central Asia. And then after 755, after the Anlushan rebellion, there are periods where the Chinese are much less present in Central Asia. And those periods may be the periods that tell us the most about the possibilities for multilateralism, where we can see political units of roughly the same size cooperating with each other. So, for example, the rulers of Dunhuang and the rulers of Khotan have a lot of exchanges. Neither of them is a giant state the way that the Tang Dynasty is. There aren't that many examples in the past of giant states successfully cooperating with smaller states. And when we talk about the Treaty of Chanyuan, that is very important, because the Chinese make some concessions to the Liao, and the peace lasts for 100 years. But at the same time that the Song are not fighting with the Liao, they are fighting with the Tanguts, with the Xixia. There is constant war during this. So, the Song they don't achieve their goal of perfect peace. So I guess I would say that things are complicated. Things are complicated now. Yeah, things were complicated in the past.
Yeah, I think that historically, that even though the Silk Road already started, of course, even though it's not that huge distance, but then across the time and also the distance, there were spirit of trade and exchanges and things like that. But I really think now we had the marine globalization, which you rightly described, around year 1000. But now probably we will have a land continental globalization, because where infrastructure is possible now. For example, last year the intercontinental trade between China and Asia and China and Europe has increased 50 times, 50%. And the dispatches of 12,000 cohort of trains back and forth. So that's incredible. And whereas the containers now are in great shortage now, because of so many shifted to Europe but not coming back. So what I'm thinking is that maybe we're having now a new demand of even stronger for the exchanges of the good and trade, and that's really the stabilizer for the peace and the security. So I hope that we can build up this infrastructure. I think whereas China now built this infrastructure for the last 4 decades, now China has the high-speed railway. The total length of that is equals to the next 10 countries combined. I mean, anywhere you go is a few hours now. So that has greatly helped China, with 1 billion smartphone users, and lifted 800 million people out of poverty. So infrastructure is really probably a big drive for the next phase of globalization, coupled with technology and things like that. So we hope that we can work out with China also has Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is most multilateralized acceptable global bank, where all the countries are in it except US, but India is the largest recipient. So this is really a great public model, and I hope that you can play more role in the Belt and Road Initiative for Asia and the connectivity. So so this is really interesting. But again, I want to raise another question, is that because you are a historian, a well-known historian, and the Chinese history, of course, the first time for many people to know that Song Dynasty is really the most globalized place in the world, one of the mobilized. At that time, I've seen some figures, that it was the run of the peak time in China when there's also the commodity economy, culture, education, science, and has all reached a relatively height at that time. And also it counts about 22% of the global GDP then. And then, but you are right, it's 30-40% of the global population. So probably, since we're talking about 1,000 years of globalization, where Song Dynasty is a great place to be representative. Maybe you could give us still some description on this subject.
About the globalization in the Song, I think to me, we haven't talked about this yet, but to me, one of the hallmarks of globalization is that people who produce something don't even see the market where their goods go. So that I think that's why people have this feeling today of things being out of control, right? That they make something and they don't know where it's going or who is buying it. And in the Song, we can see that we have this massive production on the coast of ceramics. We have metal mining in Chinese mining. We have Chinese textiles. These things are all leaving China and traveling to Southeast Asia or India, the Middle East, East Africa. And people in China don't know that much about where those things are going. And the same thing is true of the people that they're trading with, that all of these natural products that are coming from Southeast Asia, we have descriptions of people, the forest dwelling peoples, who lived basically hunting and gathering, are suddenly having to produce in the sense of having to hunt and gather for a foreign market. And for example, kingfisher birds with the blue feathers, that this is an import that the Chinese value enormously. But imagine somebody living in a forest in Indonesia, hunting these birds, and then bringing them to some kind of broker. And then this feather trade is very important in the year 1000. So that I think is something that maybe we're in a modern world. We can see things, we can know more because of information, the freer movement of information. We can know more about distant markets, but that the impact of distant markets, that 1 year you can sell a huge amount of some good, and then the next year the market collapses and you don't know why. And then the market has collapsed and all of those people have lost their jobs. That's something I think that is worth thinking about as going forward, how we can harness information so that we can mitigate the damage of globalization.
Yeah, I think that also one of the characteristics I think at the Song, even probably before then, Tang, that the China is also quite open. We had a Buddhism actually coming to China. We had also right. Christianity coming to China, Islamic coming to China. So that probably also contribute to the openness of the dynasty. And then that's where China becomes so developed at that time. And one of the largest economy, probably the largest economy in the world then, and that's where globalization is most happened at the Song Dynasty during that time in the world. So I think when we review that history is probably one of the things we can think about is that we should continue to open. We should get more open to accept also welcome all the different culture and maybe trying to learn from each other, and so that the Song can, and also the history in Tang Dynasty as well, can contribute to to the other parts of the world as well. And also the Confucianism actually taking a strong hold actually during the Song Dynasty, where I think the then government is really practiced quite a bit then, and then making it more widely accepted in China. So all those elements probably played some role in promoting the globalization at the Song Dynasty, possibly.
Yes, I think that's true. I think that I personally find the exchange of information, especially in this early period, the free exchange of information quite inspiring. And there's a person I talk about in the book named Al-Biruni, and he is in India. He's an advisor to a ruler. Well, he's in India. He's based in Afghanistan, and some envoys come from the Liao to visit his ruler, and he has a chance to talk to them and to learn about North China. And he learns a lot about South China too. And he writes about China in Arabic, and he writes about the encounter between his ruler and the envoy from the Liao dynasty. Unfortunately, his ruler, the Liao, send an envoy, and this is in 1026 or 1027, and they want to initiate a diplomatic relations with him, and the ruler, Mahmud of Ghazni, says no. But so that, I think we should not take any lessons from that. I think that's an example of close-mindedness. But his advisor, Al-Biruni, talks to the envoys from the Liao dynasty and uses that chance to learn more about China. And so I agree with you. I think that that's got to be the way forward, is to try to learn from each other. From others. One country has to learn from other countries and from people in those other countries about how those societies function.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So we are actually we talked about over an hour now. We still have a bit of time, but finally we have collected some questions. As a routine of our series of dialogue. So we have some questions from Chinese media and scholars as well. One of the scholar actually from Peking University, he wrote that he was saying that the Vikings' voyage to North America should be compared with other important events before it in history, such as human beings' migration from African to other continents, or Arabs' expansion to West Asia, North Asia, and South Europe in the 7th, 8th century. So what about the question that one of the scholars raised? I also have some media question after that, maybe.
It's funny. Of course, there's overland migration in different periods. There are people who think globalization began earlier than 1000. There's a group of scholars who argue it began in 3000 BC, because you can see lapis lazuli from Pakistan in Mesopotamia. So they point to these connections, this movement of trade goods earlier. I was going to say the first people who get to Australia get there in 40,000 BC. 40,000 BP, 40,000 years before the present. So there's always migration, right? That overland migration. And some of that has to do with the changing land masses, like people coming into the Americas maybe 15,000 years ago across it's now Alaska and the Bering Straits historically. And so there's an ocean separating Alaska from Russia now. Historically, there was a land bridge. So, I'm in response to that question, yes, there's migration, but the scale of migration increases a lot because of this in the year 1000. The slave trade, there's a slave trade from Africa, from actually Northern Europe, from Central Asia into the Islamic world. And it starts, it predates the year 1000, but it accelerates in the year 1000. So when you look around the world, you can see there are precursors to the things I'm talking about, but there's a real change in the year 1000.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. So that's explain your case well. I think that year 1000 is probably the time that particularly all those three continents, and then in China, the Song Dynasty, where that is the peak at that time. The globalization really get on the speed now, and probably before that, as we mentioned, there could be migration here and there, and it could be Silk Road, started even longer than that. But I think accelerated the beginning of year 1000. I have another question from China Daily, actually. How could the world overcome the difficulties facing globalization, and how can we achieve more balanced global development in the world of post-pandemic? So this is really a contemporary question for you. We actually now have over 600,000, 700,000 viewers online right now. My staff just showed me. So the topic is really interesting. Yeah.
Oh, I'm very glad to hear this, but I'm also feeling a lot of pressure. I have to confess that I don't have an answer to going forward. I guess the best answer I can give is to say that those of us like you and I who've benefited from globalization, and I said, we're products of globalization, right? I think we have to think more about people who are not benefiting from globalization, and I think about if, for example, in America, and I don't know the number. You're very good on your numbers. I'm not that good, but I think I forget the number of people who don't have a passport, who've never gone, who've never left the country, and maybe for China, how many people have never left China, right? So for people, in some ways I feel like we're living in two worlds. That there's a world where there's a group of people who can travel pre-pandemic, travel freely and study in different countries, and have the wealth to do that. And then there's another world of people who are really struggling to survive. And I think as we go forward, I think we've got to be thinking about balancing the needs of those two groups.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you're right. I mean, I don't remember how many Chinese has a passport. Maybe I remember seeing a number of 200, 300 million. But I know there's a number that Chinese has outbound tourists before pandemic has reached 100 million, 150 billion. That's quite a lot of people, probably compared with US, that the Chinese people there's 200 million people in China study English. I mean, at least, right. 280 million, according to the latest population consensus, are college graduates or are still in the college. So knows somewhat international language. So it shows that China now is getting a bit more looking to the world now. But I agree with you that the challenge we are having with the future of globalization is really how to shrink this gap. As I had another conversation with Angus Deaton, a professor from Princeton University. I mean, basically he tells me, a Nobel laureate, he tells me that the life expectancy, according to their study in the United States, has actually dropping in the last 2 or 3 years because there's more people felt they are not really benefiting from globalization. But then, whereas the 1% of the most wealthy people is equal to almost 40, 50% of the general mass population in the US now. And that's where is the challenge. And probably China shouldn't be the scapegoat for that. So I hope that if we all concentrate on our own domestic issues, we solve that, infrastructure, lifting poverty, and taking care of its people, then maybe we'll have a bit better dialogue among ourselves rather than we really blame each other, probably. Yeah. So
Yes.
that's yeah. I have another question for you. You know, because people know you're coming, and from China Radio International. Basically, the question was, if you are supposed to tell young people of this era about the 3 major events, except for the 2 world wars that changed the world during the past 100 years, what would be the choice? And I guess I don't know if you want to say pandemic, or is there any other
With
things?
the last 100 years?
Yes, 3 things he wants to list. I mean, you know, if World War I, World II is a 2 event, or you may have other choice, but for me, I would say pandemic probably. Yeah.
Well, right now it feels like the pandemic, right? But you know, if the pandemic, there are some pandemics in the past that the effects lasted for hundreds of years. The Black Death in Europe in 1348 lasted for, you know, the impact of that. People think 1/3 of Europe's population died. And, you know, there is an argument that the Industrial Revolution happens in Europe because Europe's population is small, and they need labor-saving devices. So right now, I think it's very hard. I speak as a medievalist. I work on the world 1,000 years ago. The events from the last, it's funny, I remember having a conversation about this, you know, with my father who died about 10 years ago. And the things that affected people, things like the invention of electricity, right? The coming of electricity to people's houses, that's a little bit before 1920, right? I'm supposed to think about things since 1921. The telephone, right? I mean, you know, something you and I have lived through is seeing the ubiquity of telephones, right? That and that you can call, I mean, you and I this is a free call we're having, right? When I was a student, once a month I would go, you know, to a pay phone and call my father, you know, and it was very expensive. So I think I think the invention of the computer has to be something that's affected many people. You know, I'm just I was going to say some things about food supply, right? About, you know, the Green Revolution is that, I don't know that we have a specific date, but Yuan Longping has just died. That's something that I think has had a huge impact. So, you know, in some ways, I think those things had greater impact than the world wars.
Yeah, you talk about those great inventions and also the contributions, you know, of those great, you know, experts like you know, like Mr. Yuan Longping just in the last week passed away. But absolutely, you know, the agricultural revolution, right? I mean, that lifted. I'm sure it contributed significantly in lifting 800 million people out of poverty, and even worldwide on that.
Yes, so even worldwide, right?
Yeah. So that's really a key message. So the second question from them is that what key principles and spirits of East Asian and traditional Confucian culture should be better promoted, recognized, and play a bigger role in contemporary time? So basically, a little similar to the discussion. They really felt you are expert on the Chinese culture and East Asia culture.
Well, you know, I'm a college professor, so it won't surprise you to hear that I think education is important. I think in America, people have a pretty good sense of the East Asian respect for education, right? And we can see that with Chinese immigrants coming to America, that they're often emphasize education. Their children do well in school. If you, I mean, you may know about this in New York, there's a test to get into the public high schools, the state-funded high schools. And classically, the highest number of people who doing well on that test, the largest ethnic group to do well on that test are Chinese people. So that I think is something people know in the world about Asia. I think people in America and Europe still, and I think this is entirely understandable, have a Eurocentric view of the past. In the same way, I think people in China have a Sinocentric view of the past. I'm part of a project now that's interested in the history of printing. And if you talk to if you ask the average American when printing began, I'm not sure they're going to name Gutenberg, but I think they'll say, oh, it's movable type, it's the Renaissance. And that's just factually not true, right? There is printing in China starting, well, I was going to say the date, it's around 700, because the earliest printed materials we have characters from, I call her Emperor Wu, Empress Wu of the Tang Dynasty, Wu Zetian, so, we have some individual sheets of paper that were printed, and there's a debate about whether printing starts in China or Japan or Korea. But that's 700 years earlier than Gutenberg. And that's something I think that people in the rest of the world don't really realize. And so that's something I'm working on now with a very large group of people, a very fun group of people. Some of the earliest surviving examples of movable type books are from Korea. And so, and those are from I was going to say a classic modern phenomenon. The book is from the 1370s. The earliest book printed with movable type was made in Korea, and it's in a French library. It's in the Bibliothèque Nationale. So, I think getting that news out is something that would maybe help people to understand better the history of East Asia. And as you said, the book markets were in the pre-modern world, really the kind of, you had a good word for this, a data center for people at that time. And book markets are important in Europe too, but the book markets start earlier in Asia than they do in Europe. I think that's something most people don't know.
Yeah. Very fascinating. I mean, to hear you talk about that. Education, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, that's also the former ambassador of US in China, Terry Branstad, told me the same. Chinese attach a great importance of family, education, family values, but also hardworking as well. So that he attributed the success of China to those three factors. But I think that you are having this new project of this, where all those typing coming from, and what's the history of that, will be really a great one, because that's where I think your book has outlined many concrete examples and events to back up the theory. So that's interesting me greatly. So I think we are almost time, and we had a very fascinating discussion tonight, and in your time morning in Yale, but also I think we have reviewed the history of globalization, where you propose this globalization started really in full, at the very obvious stage. Started with year 1000, and that's another 5 years before the Columbus discovered the American continent. But also the Song Dynasty is one of the most globalized places in the world at that time, and Quanzhou is one of the business port then, and Chinese has the largest population of 100 million during the year 1000 time. So all those are really fascinating discussions. I really found a lot of interest. I think we need to review that history. We need to summarize what has done well, and I mean, a lot of human nature, spirit, culture, great ingredient are still the same, but the format and the technology and the transformation has been changing again and again, and then now we are facing a lot of challenges: deglobalization, populism, nationalism. We're in a globalized world, cannot keep it together now. We have to really revisit the history wisdom and also find a new solution, particularly solve these inequality issues and also let's have a openness, openness, continue to open. That's really important. So I think it's really a great discussion we have, and I really appreciate your time. But also I would like you to say a few words to conclude as a final remark as well.
Oh, that's very generous of you. I didn't expect you to say that. As you were talking, I was thinking that in the beginning of globalization, I think the forces of globalization are much weaker than they are now, right? There are the people who were directly affected by foreign trade is smaller than now. Historically, there was a huge slave trade. I write about that in the book. It doesn't really affect China. That's an interesting question about why there doesn't seem to be, there are not so many slaves in China as there are in the Islamic world. But I was going to say, the forces of globalization are weaker, but we can already see that it's adversely affecting some people so much that they riot, right? And they kill the foreign merchants who are living in Cairo and in Constantinople. There's the Quanzhou rebellion, where there's the massacre of the Arab merchants who are living in Quanzhou, and the death toll is debated, right? We have two Arabic sources. One says 80,000, one says 120,000. I just read an article that said, which was interesting, that all of these numbers you should just divide by 10. I have never read this. So maybe 8,000 people died or 12,000 people died. It's still a lot of people who died in these riots. And so I guess my view, and I may romanticize the past a little bit, I hope not, is that the forces of globalization were weaker in the beginning around the year 1000, and that the checks that existed in the year 1000, like the risks of shipping and the high number of shipwrecks, the costs of overland trade, which meant that there just wasn't that much trade going overland because it cost so much to ship things, and camel caravans could get lost, people died, they could be robbed. All of those checks, I think, were stronger in the past than they are now. And I think as we go forward, we have to think about what kinds of checks that we may need to institute to try to balance, well, we've talked about this today, balance the impact of globalization. The pandemic, in a way, is a check, right, on the process of globalization. Just like, oh, okay, we've had, over a year to think very hard about this world we live in and how we're going to go forward in the future. And I think you're going to have to find a futurologist, not a historian, to tell you about that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that the globalization is very resilient and, of course, full of vitality and its own momentum. And of course, there will be setbacks and zigzags, but the trend will continue. I mean, it's not linear, but it will certainly be a future trend. I think, as you already said, globalization, when initially there were so many, not many people get benefit of that, but now it's massively. Just imagine 200 Chinese people are learning English, and also 150 million people from China touring around the world. Globalization is here to stay, and then China become the largest trading with 130 countries, and of course, and actually, so I think that the globalization, with more inclusive globalization, will continue, and then that is really, we need a multilateralism, we need peaceful coexistence. And we have to learn with each other, learn to live with each other peacefully. I mean, that's probably the lesson we also learn from globalization as well. So once again, thank you very much. And I hope when you come to China, we'll see you again, and also invite you to speak at CCG. And actually tonight we had about 800,000 people watched us from different portals and social media. So thank you very much, Professor Hansen, and it was nice talking to you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your taking the time to prepare such a careful interview. it was really a pleasure, Professor Wang.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you for our audience as well. Thank you very much.